Hua Chung didn't even turn his head. "Bring him over." Thus the waning moon officer carried the boy inside and put him gently on the ground. Shi Lian couldn't help but peek at the officer's wrist again, to see whether there really was a cursed shackle. But he bowed and stood down swiftly after delivering the boy. Since there were no more important matters at hand, Shi Lian cut in first and soothed the boy. "Don't be scared. It was my fault last time. I won't do it again." The boy's eyes were wide with fear and confusion, but he stayed in place. Perhaps because he had run out of energy to escape, or perhaps because he knew he couldn't get away. He peeked at Shi Lian, then peeked at the lap table on the black jade divan. Shi Lian followed his line of sight, and saw he was eyeing a plate of luscious fruit. The boy must have been hiding for too long and had not eaten. Shi Lian turned to Hua Chung, but before he could say anything, Hua Chung answered, "Go ahead. No need to ask me." It wasn't the time for politeness, so Shi Lian uttered a thanks and reached for the plate of fruit, giving it to the boy. That boy snatched the plate from Shi Lian and started stuffing fruit into his mouth. It appeared he really was desperately starving. Even when Shi Lian was at his worst, starved like a stray dog, he'd never shoved food into his face like this. "Slow down," he chided gently. After a pause, he attempted, "What's your name?" The boy mumbled as he ate, looking as if he was trying to say something but couldn't do so clearly. "He may not have spoken in many years and has forgotten how," Hua Chung suggested. Indeed, it looked like this boy did not speak much, not even to Xiao Ying, and had likely been like this for a long time. Shi Lian sighed. "We can do this slowly." By then, all the fruit on the platter had been devoured like a whirlwind. Seeing that his bandages were soaked with dried blood, covered in black and red spots alike, Shi Lian made a gentle offer after a moment of thought. "There are wounds on your face, and they seem serious. Let me help take a look." At the mention of unwrapping his bandages, fear immediately engulfed the boy's eyes. However, after Shi Lian's tireless soothing and encouragement, he once more sat down obediently. Shi Lian retrieved a bottle of medicinal powder from his sleeve, moving slowly as he unraveled the mess of bandages around his head. As he had suspected, although the boy's face was a mangled mess, all the terrifying little human faces were gone, replaced by large blotches of bright red scars. The last time they met at Mount Yuzhen, there were burns covering his face, but not as much blood. This boy must have used a knife to cut away the human faces from his own since then, leaving those scars behind. Shi Lian's hands trembled softly as he rubbed the medicine in. Hua Chung caught his wrist and said, "Let me." Shi Lian shook his head and gently pulled his hand free, then said in a low voice, "No, let me do this myself." 800 years ago in the kingdom of Shenle, many who contracted the disease found themselves with no other options and chose this route of self-mutilation. It was hell on earth. Some would miss their target and cut where they shouldn't, and die from blood loss as a result. Some, although successful in removing the terrible lesions, never healed from those wounds. As Shi Lian wrapped fresh bandages around the boy's head, he realized that his features were actually quite proper, his nose straight and refined, his eyes black and clear. He should have been a handsome young man, but now he bore such a terrifying appearance. He was like many others before him. Even if he cut away the distorted human faces, his face would forever be a nightmare, never to recover. Shi Lian finished wrapping the new bandages before he asked with a shaky voice, "Are you from Shenle?" The boy turned to gaze at him with big eyes. Shi Lian repeated his question, but the boy only shook his head. Shi Lian then asked, "Then where are you from, exactly?" The boy answered arduously, "Yong'an." The human face disease had only ever erupted within the kingdom of Shenle, yet this boy was from the kingdom of Yong'an. Shi Lian felt his sight go dark, and he blurted out, "Have you ever met White-Clothed Calamity?" White-Clothed Calamity. The origin of plagues, the symbol of misfortune. He was the nightmare of the previous generation of gods, before Crimson Rainsought Flower was born. If not for Junwu, who personally exterminated him, that nightmare would have probably continued even to this day. That Supreme was always dressed in snow-white funeral garb, his expansive sleeves fluttering, and he wore a cry-smiling mask on his face. The mask was called that because the right half of it was smiling, and the left half was crying, half joyous, half sad. If he was seen somewhere, it meant that place would soon be doomed to ruin, and that chaos would befall the land. In the last battle before the fall of his kingdom, Shilian stood upon the towering city walls of Shinla's imperial capital. His face was covered in grime, and tears were written with a lost and bemused expression as he gazed down at his kingdom. In his blurred vision, there stood a white silhouette among the fields of corpses just outside the city walls, his giant white sleeves fluttering, his figure distinct. Shilian dropped his head to look down at him, and the white apparition raised his head to look at Shilian, and waved directly at him. That cry-smiling mask was the nightmare Shilian couldn't chase away, even after hundreds of years. The boy didn't seem to know what the white no-face was, and only watched Shilian with a blank expression. All of a sudden, he let out a loud cry of, "Ah!" It turned out that Shilian had unconsciously grabbed his shoulder and gripped too hard. It wasn't until that shout that Shilian snapped out of it and hurriedly released his grip. "I'm sorry." Hua Cheng spoke in a low voice. "You're tired. Go rest." As soon as he said those words, two dainty girls entered the hall from a small door on the side wall and took the boy away. He frequently looked back at Shilian as he was being led off, and Shilian comforted him. "Don't worry. I'll come find you again in a bit." Hua Cheng turned to Shilian. "Sit down and relax, and leave him for now. If you have any questions for him, I have my ways of prying open his lips." Prying open his lips sounded rather horrifying, and Shilian hurriedly replied, "No, that's all right. If he couldn't say anything, then let it go. We'll take this slow." Hua Cheng sat down next to Shilian. "What are your plans for the boy?" Shilian gave the question some thought. "Keep him with me and bring him along." "He's a ghost, not a human," Hua Cheng said. "Why don't you leave him here in Ghost City? I'll have no trouble feeding another mouth." Shilian replied earnestly, "Sanlang, truly, thank you, but when I said I would bring him along with me, it's not just for the purpose of keeping him around." Ghost City was indeed Hua Cheng's territory, and if he was willing to protect the boy, then no one could harm him, nor would he go hungry. However, the most important thing was to actually guide the boy, to help him organize his mind and speech so that he could look and behave normally. Ghost City was a bustling place, but it was chaotic and wild and unsuitable for such counseling. Shilian couldn't think of anyone who would have the patience to undertake this task besides himself. Shilian replied, "I'm already immensely grateful that you found him for me. I can't trouble you any more with the aftermath." Hua Cheng appeared to disagree, but didn't push further. He said plainly, "It's really no trouble. While you're here, just let me know if you need anything, and you're free to go wherever you want." Just then, Shilian noticed movement. The scimitar on Hua Cheng's waist seemed to have gone through a sudden change. Shilian looked down and was instantly amazed. It turned out that there was a silver eye crafted on the hilt of that scimitar. The pattern of the eye was formed by a mere few silver strokes. But, although simple, it looked vivid enough to be alive. He didn't notice it at first because the eye was closed in a thin line, but just now the eye fluttered open and revealed a crimson, gem-like pupil, rattling as it spun once. Hua Cheng noticed it too and said solemnly, "Gaga, I need to leave for a bit. I'll be right back." "An alarm?" Shilian asked. "Could Lord Windmaster and Chen Chou have shown their true selves here in Ghost City?" Shilian rose too. "I'll come with you." Hua Cheng gently pushed him back down. "Don't worry. It's not His Highness Tai Hua or the other one. Gaga, just sit here. There's no need for you to go too." Since Hua Cheng made it that clear, Shilian couldn't keep insisting on going along. Hua Cheng turned and left the main hall, waving from the doorway. The beaded curtain parted automatically as he approached, and once he exited, it let itself back down, clacking as it did. Seated on the black jaded divan, Shilian relaxed briefly and thought about the bandaged boy. Remembering the objective of his trip, however, he rose to his feet. He passed through the small door the girls had left from and came to a small garden. The vermilion corridor cutting across the garden was empty of life. Shilian was still wondering which way he should go, when suddenly a black shadow flashed by. That retreating silhouette. It was the waning moon officer. Shilian recalled the cursed shackle on the officer's wrist. It had been on his mind. He was about to call out to him when the silhouette disappeared. From the way the man moved, it seemed he was wary of being discovered. Thus, Shilian soundlessly followed after him, making his way to the corner of the building behind which the officer disappeared. Shilian clung to the wall and stealthily gazed over. That youth moved swiftly and was constantly on the lookout around him, extremely cautious and indeed afraid to be seen. Shilian wondered, the waning moon officer should be one of Sanlang's subordinates, so why is he sneaking around inside Sanlang's territory? Shi Lian suspected this man could possess ill intent, so he also hid himself and followed. The waning moon officer made a number of turns through the hallways, but Shi Lian held his breath and was always within a dozen steps behind. They rounded a corner and came to a long hallway. At the end, there was a set of large, beautifully decorated doors. If he turns around now, there won't be anywhere to hide, Shi Lian thought. Unexpectedly, just as the thought crossed his mind, the waning moon officer stopped and turned his head. Shi Lian knew he was in trouble the moment the officer paused. Hastily, Roya flew out and wrapped itself several times around the wooden beams overhead, pulling Shi Lian up to the ceiling where he clung to the beam. The waning moon officer didn't see anyone behind him and didn't think to look up, so he turned around and continued on his way. Nonetheless, Shi Lian still didn't dare to let himself down too soon. He remained pressed against the ceiling as he inched forward, silently thinking that he resembled a gecko as he moved. Good thing the other party didn't go far and stopped before a set of doors. Shi Lian stopped too to observe. Before this door there was a statue of a woman, wily and beautiful. Of course, from Shi Lian's angle, all he could see clearly was her round head and a shallow, round jaded plate in her hands. The waning moon officer didn't move to open the door first, but instead turned to the statue and tossed something onto the jaded plate. It made a crisp, clacking sound. Dice? Shi Lian guessed. It was a sound he'd heard many times today, and not one he'd forget for a long time. Sure enough, when the masked youth removed his hand and Shi Lian looked, it was indeed 2 dice in the jaded plate, both revealing 6 red dots. The waning moon officer tucked the dice away before opening the door. It was surprisingly unlocked, and when he entered through the door and closed them behind him, Shi Lian didn't hear any sound of locks or latches either. He waited for a moment before he fluttered down to the ground as quietly as a piece of paper and crossed his arms as he examined the doors. This room didn't appear to be that big, and whatever the waning moon officer was doing inside should make noise. Yet, once he entered, there was not a sound from within. Shi Lian decisively raised a hand and pushed. Sure enough, when he opened the door, there was not a soul inside. From the looks of it, this was a perfectly normal, if quite luxurious, little room. Everything inside was in order at a glance, and there was no possibility that there was a secret path. Shi Lian closed the door and looked thoughtfully at the female statue at the jaded plate in her hands. It seemed that the mechanism lay in that jaded plate and the 2 dice. The room was still locked, not with a physical lock, but a magic one. A key was required to open this lock, or an authoritation incantation. The dice must roll 2 6s in that plate for one to see the real destination behind the doors. But Shi Lian rolling 2 6s right then and there was something that would never happen. He could only gaze at the door and sigh. After he paced for a bit in front of the doors, he withdrew and returned from whence he came. After walking for a while, he stopped abruptly. Walking toward him from the other end of the path was a tall, red-clad figure with a slender and long silver scimitar hung at his waist. It was Hua Cheng. He walked over with his arms crossed. "Gaga, I've been looking for you." He looked exactly as he did when he left, the only difference being that the scimitar on his waist was out of its scabbard. It, along with the scabbard, clattered against him, clanking as he walked, painting a picture of arrogance. However, that silver eye on the hill of Emming was closed. Shi Lian composed himself and said, "I was going to see the child, but I didn't realize your house was so big. I got lost." At first, Shi Lian was going to tell Hua Cheng about what had just happened, but when the words came to his lips, they turned around and he swallowed them. The reason he had come to Ghost City was to investigate the missing heavenly official. Any signs of suspiciousness must not be ignored. And who knows? Maybe the missing official was imprisoned in that room. It'd be best if he could find a way to go through those doors first. If the 2 matters were unrelated, Shi Lian would report to Hua Cheng about his subordinate's suspicious actions. But if the 2 matters were related? Hua Cheng spoke as he led Shi Lian back to the main hall. "If you want to see that boy, I can send someone to bring him to you. There's no need for you to seek him out yourself." It was probably because Shi Lian had something to hide, but the way he spoke to Hua Cheng unconsciously became more docile. "You finished your business so fast?" "It's finished," Hua Cheng replied. "Just another gang of useless trash embarrassing themselves, that's all." The tone in which he said useless trash was very familiar, and Shi Lian guessed, did Green Ghost Chi-Rong come and cause trouble? Hua Cheng laughed. "That's right. Didn't I tell you that many have their eye on my place here? Chi-Rong has wanted Ghost City for himself for years now. But the most he can ever do is want and burn with envy. So every so often he'll send some even more useless underlings to cause mischief. Nothing worth mentioning. Don't worry about it. Actually, I just happen to have a place I want to show Guga. Might Guga grant me the pleasure? Of course, Shilian replied happily. Traversing the long corridor, Hua Cheng led Shilian to another lofty great hall. The doors of the hall seemed to be made of steel, with violent beasts carved upon them, horrible and terrifying. The moment Hua Cheng approached, the beasts parted and opened the doors. A blast of killing intent assaulted Shilian before he even stepped foot into the hall, and he tensed, veins popping on his hands, prepared to face anything. However, once he saw clearly what was inside the hall, he blinked. His defenses melted away in an instant, and his legs moved on their own, guiding him inside. Within the great hall, all manner of weapons were hung on all four walls. There were sabers, swords, spears, shields, whips, warhammers. It was an armory. Any man finding himself in an armory such as this, surrounded by all kinds of weaponry, would feel as if he were in heaven, and his blood would boil with excitement. Shilian was no exception. His eyes were wide and his face bright. The last time he had felt such exhilaration was in Junwoo's armory. Although his expression remained schooled, he was already so excited he was stammering. May I touch? Hua Cheng smiled. As Guga likes. Shilian's hands instantly flew out to feel the various weapons hung on the walls, so absorbed he couldn't tear himself away. All of these are masterpieces. This sword is splendid. A battle of one against many would definitely bring out its godly powers. This one too. Wait, and that saber. Hua Cheng was leaning on the wall near the door, watching Shilian's face flush with delight. Guga, what do you think? Shilian was examining each piece so intently he was reluctant to turn around. What do I think what? Do you like it? Hua Cheng asked. I do, Shilian replied. Do you like it a lot? Hua Cheng asked again. Very much, Shilian exclaimed. Hua Cheng seemed to have snickered, but Shilian didn't notice. His heart was busy racing as he unsheathed a cold and shimmering verdant blade at least 4 feet long, marveling as he did so. Has Guga found any that he particularly fancies? Hua Cheng spoke up again. Shilian's entire face was bright and glowing, and he was unable to stop singing praises. Yes, all of them! Originally, I was thinking Guga didn't have any useful weapons on hand, so if there was anything here you fancied, you could just take it for yourself, Hua Cheng said. But since Guga likes them all, I'll give them all to you. No, there's no need, Shilian said quickly. I have no use for weapons anyway. Really? Hua Cheng said. But I clearly see that Guga loves swords. Liking them doesn't mean I have to own them, Shilian said. I haven't used one in years. Just looking makes me happy. Besides, I'd have nowhere to put them if you gave them all to me. That's easy to solve, Hua Cheng replied. I'll give this entire armory to you. Shilian took that as a joke and grinned. There's no way I could take away a room this big. No need to take it away, Hua Cheng said. I'll give you the property too. Just come visit when you're free. No, it's okay, Shilian said. An armory requires constant maintenance. I'd hate to neglect the weapons. Shilian placed the sword carefully back onto its holder and said nostalgically, Once upon a time I owned an armory like this too, but it was burned down. All of these weapons are precious devices to be desired. You have to cherish them, Sanlang. That's easy too, Hua Cheng said. If I'm free, I can help Guga maintain the armory. Shilian laughed. Well, I certainly don't have the guts to ask my lord the Ghost King to do chores for me. All of a sudden, Junwoo's warning right before he left for this mission echoed in Shilian's mind. The scimitar Emming is a cursed blade, a blade of misfortune. To forge such an evil weapon would require terrifyingly cruel sacrifice and bloody determination. Do not touch it, and do not let it touch you either. If you do, the consequences will be unimaginable. Shilian contemplated, but still decided to ask in the end. But, Sanlang, none of these weapons are a match against your scimitar Emming, right? Hua Cheng cocked his left brow. Oh? Has Guga heard of my scimitar too? I've heard some rumors, Shilian replied. Hua Cheng snickered. I bet they weren't very nice rumors. Did someone tell you that my scimitar was forged by an evil, bloody ritual? That I sacrificed living humans? Sharp as always, Shilian responded. Nothing too horrible. Everyone has negative gossip said about them, but not everyone would believe it. But perhaps I might have the honor of seeing the legendary scimitar Emming? You've actually already seen it, Guga, Hua Chung said. He took a few steps closer to Shilian and said softly, Look, Guga, this is Emming. The eye upon the scimitar that hung at his waist rattled as it swirled in Shilian's direction. It might have been Shilian's imagination, but he thought that Silver Eye was subtly squinting into a crescent. That's chapter 15.